Hey, you guys. Um, Today's been a drama-filled extravaganza full of homeschooling, bit of shouting about some software program called, or some app called Pearson Realize, which I really am not a fan of because I can never log in for my son. But we made it through semi-intact. And I'm watching the news and thinking about the stuff I see and what's happening, and what I'm thinking about now. What I'm seeing is all of this discussion of what reactions and measures are too much. What is it that we're doing right now to flatten the curve, to keep the infection from spreading? When is it too much? And I see people in my country, in my government system, saying things like, the measures we're taking now are worse than the virus itself, and we're destroying the economy and going into a Great Depression, and this is horrible, and all of these things. And so it makes me think about how economy and power are tied, which is of no surprise to anyone, of course, but then also how power economy is tied to ideology, because so much of what I've seen in the newspapers and on TV of people saying, oh, I would die for my children's generation and we should give this sacrifice, and leaders saying things like, we have to get the economy going again, even if it means the infection will spread, that this is somehow worth it, and that they would gladly sacrifice themselves, or some fellow old people, to get the economy going again. That, what's 2%? This many people die of the flu and car accidents every year, that kind of thing. When this is packaged, it seems that there's very much an ideological flavor to this. And I use the word ideological purposefully. I'm not using the word religious. This isn't said in a Christian context or an Islamic context. It's said in an ideological context, the context of the American state, in my case, patriotism, a desire to wrap oneself in one's flag and sacrifice oneself for its people. But there is an ideology to the economy, is what I'm saying. And this works, of course, for an Egyptologist. This is very Egyptian, this thing. There is a true, almost religious flavor to this. And when you think of the dollar bill, and you think of the leaders who have their images on that dollar bill, or the earliest coins that you can imagine, and the earliest coins do seem to have been minted in Egypt, which is interesting. Most people say 26th dynasty. Well, you can Google it. We'll leave it there. But those coins are ideological. They're images of power. They're associated with divinity, and they're associated with this divine right and protection, this give and take from the ruler to the gods to keep a country or place safe. And it's an interesting thing to think how in Egypt, if temples, religion, money, and power are all joined in the ancient world, that they're probably still very much joined in the modern world as well, but we're not able to tease those things apart and see it in that particular way. And it's very interesting to look through the ancient lens from my perspective, and to see people having this discussion on one side or another, and people saying they would sacrifice themselves for the economy, and other people saying that this is short-sighted and they never would. But all of it is wrapped up in discussions of power. And a particular kind of power, a power that is monopolized, a power that is limited to the very few. And that then brings me back to Egypt again, a place where the king is acting as the chief priest. He's the one in control of the whole game. And the whole religious game in Egypt, and I'm not calling it a game to denigrate it, let me call it a system instead then. The king is the one in charge of this whole religious system as chief priest. And he's the one that is using these temple institutions politically and economically, not to mention religiously, ideologically, right? That's a given. These temple institutions, they kept people employed. They amazingly created a demand for religious and ritual objects to be purchased by the public, who then wanted these things and used them for social competition, and the temple then produced them and filled that demand when people came and bought them. And temples, particularly later period Egyptian temples, created demands for animal mummies encased in bronze so that you could ask a god or goddess a particular prayer and be given an answer and feel like you're making a difference in your life in some way. The temple fulfilled that need for people. It also helped the temple to fund its own institution. But if you look at the king's place in this temple institution, he's there demanding from his people that they see him as the only interlocutor between the heavens and the earth. But he's also demanding that his people see him as the one who is in control of the economy, who has not only his finger on the pulse of it, but has absolute control of it. He can marshal all of the labor and the resources. He can get access to the metals, the gold, the greenstone, to the granite in the south, to all of the grain. He's the one that has control over all of this economy. And if you go into an Egyptian temple, if you've ever been privileged enough to do that, you'll see the king the wall after wall is covered with the king giving all of these economic resources to the gods, and the gods in return giving the king life and health and dominion. And so just one little scene here that I pulled. And here, this is a Ramesses scene. Yes, it's from a book, but there you go. Get an idea. The god is cut off, but he's there seated upon his throne, and the king is handing commodities to the god. Behind him is a female, a queen. In this case, she's holding up a sistrum and shaking that and giving the god beautiful music. But though that sistrum would have been made of something extraordinarily precious. But this is a typical scene, and in front of there's a libation vessel. There's all kinds of stuff. This is not an unusual thing to have the king giving goods and then the god in return giving things to the king. I don't know, it'd be like going into a church today and you see riches and wealth all over the church. That's for people in Italy or Spain. This is a normal thing to go into a mosque in the places where Islam developed and to see precious stones and wealth all around. It is absolutely imperative that we tie ideology and religious systems to economic power. And then the leader who is in charge of that economy or sets himself up as being in charge of that economy at the tip of that economic spear. So in the end, it's again, I think it's hard for us to tease this out because we have so much religious pluralism. We're not polytheistic anymore. We pretend not to connect divinity, God, spirituality with stuff, something so physical and base as a commodity. And yet these two are being combined. Human lives are being ideologized, that's a hard one, and equated to sacrifices that must be made. And the leader is asking his people to make those sacrifices. And so I think of things like, I think of Dynasty 1, when the Egyptian kings demanded of their elites human sacrifice, sacrificial burial. When the king died, he would demand of his elites that the young and healthy be sacrificed for his burial. If you haven't heard about this, it's a very interesting topic, and you can do some more Googling there. Or you can imagine Dynasty 4, King Khufu demanding that his people labor to build a 50-story mountain of stone for his burial, just him, just one man in that 50-story mountain of stone. The amount of labor and resources expended economically to produce that, that is a symbol of economic ideological power. You can think of Dynasty 12 and expeditions sent out by Senwosret III or Amenemhet III to strange and faraway lands like Punt, maybe in modern-day Eritrea, Ethiopia, maybe in Yemen, we don't even know, to bring back incense trees, roots and all, and millions of balls of incense so that the elites could celebrate in that wealth, and so that the king could be seen as the monopolizer of that economic resource. And you can think of expeditions of Dynasty 18 or thereafter that went out to get, Dynasty 12 too, that went out to get gold, stones, green stones like greywacke, or hard stones like granite and quartz. And they're the ones that then use these lavish materials to place them all over the monumental structures that they're building. This obviously continues. We didn't even get to Ramses the Great, though that was the stele I showed you at the beginning. So, so the kinds of things I'm thinking about today as I look at our landscape, and we all shelter at home, is what is the economic price of a human life? What does infection do, or potential infection, to an economic system? What is the cost of that? Who is hurt by it? Who's not? I know there are many people out there suffering from this crisis economically, and the leader then comes in to try to help with some of that crisis. These are very interesting questions. The point for me as an Egyptologist, using my lens of authoritarian power, is to see how interesting it is when a leader can take that economic power and make it all about ideology, religion, belief, what should be done, what is morally right to do, and convince people that that's the way it should be. So I'll leave you to discuss. These are big questions, but I hope everyone's staying healthy, and yeah, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.